The Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by welcoming reports this week of significant progress in the vaccine trials in Oxford? We all know there's a long way to go, but I want to record my thanks and admiration for everybody involved in this huge effort. Mr. Speaker, under my leadership, national security will always be the top priority for Labour. So I want to ask the Prime Minister about the extremely serious report by the Intelligence and Security Committee. It concludes that Russia poses an immediate and urgent threat to our national security and is engaged in a range of activities that include espionage, interfering in democratic processes and serious crime. The Prime Minister received that report 10 months ago. Given that the threat is described as immediate and urgent, why on earth did the Prime Minister sit on that report for so long?
Well, Mr. Speaker, actually, when I was Foreign Secretary, for the period that I've been in office, we've been taking the strongest possible action against Russian wrongdoing, orchestrating, I seem to remember, the expulsion of 130 Russian diplomats, 153 Russian diplomats around the world, while the Right Honourable gentleman opposite sat on his hands and said nothing, while the Labour Party parroted the line of the Kremlin when people in this country were poisoned at the orders of Vladimir Putin.
Mr. Speaker, I stood up and condemned what happened in Salisbury, and the Prime Minister, I supported the then Prime Minister on record. So I'd ask the Prime Minister to check the record and withdraw that. I was very, very clear. The report was very clear that until recently the government's badly underestimated the Russian threat and the response it required. It's still playing catch-up. The government's taken its eye off the ball. Arguably, it wasn't even on the pitch. After this government's been in power for 10 years, how does the Prime Minister explain that?
Mr. Speaker, I think the Right Honourable Gentleman's questions are absolutely absurd. There is no country in the Western world that is more vigilant in protecting the interests of this country or the international community from Russian interference. And in fact, we are going further now, introducing new legislation to protect critical national infrastructure and to protect our intellectual property. And I think he will find, if he goes to any international body or any gathering around the world, that is the UK that leads the world in caution about Russian interference. And I must say, I don't wish to contradict the Right Honourable Gentleman, but he sat on his hands, he said nothing. The leader of the opposition parroted the line of the Kremlin that the UK should supply. I didn't hear him criticise the then leader of the opposition. If he criticised the then leader of the opposition, then now is the time for him to set the record straight.
Mr. Speaker, I was absolutely clear in condemning what happened in Salisbury, not least because I was involved in bringing proceedings against Russia on behalf of the Litvinenko family. That is why I was so strong about it. And Mr. Speaker, I spent 5 years as Director of Public Prosecutions working on live operations with the security and intelligence services, so I'm not going to take lectures from the Prime Minister about national security. The Prime Minister says he's going to bring forward...
I think somebody wants to go for a cup of tea. We don't want an early bath. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says he will bring forward new legislation. I want to make it clear to the Prime Minister we will support that legislation and work with the government. It's not before time. 18 months ago, the Prime Minister says the government's vigilant. 18 months ago, the Home Secretary said we don't have all the powers yet to tackle the Russian threat. And he said the Official Secrets Act are completely out of date. Other legislation's been passed in that 18-month period. This is about national security. Why has the government delayed so long in bringing forward this legislation?
Mr. Speaker, this government is bringing forward legislation, not only a new Espionage Act, not only new laws to protect against theft of our intellectual property, but also a Magnitsky Act directly to counter individuals in Russia or elsewhere who transgress human rights. And there's been no doubt what this is really all about, Mr. Speaker. This is about pressure from the Islingtonian Remainers who have seized on this report to try to give the impression that Russian interference was somehow responsible for Brexit, Mr. Speaker. That's what this is all about. The people of this country didn't vote to leave the EU because of pressure from Russia or Russian interference. They voted because they wanted to take back control of our money, of our trade policy, of our laws. And the simple fact is that after campaigning for Remain, after wanting to overturn the people's referendum day in, day out, all the period when he was sitting on the Labour front bench, he simply can't bring himself to accept that.
Can I just gently say to the Prime Minister, as I did last time, he may have to go to Specsavers. The chair is this way, not that way. If he can address me, it would be a lot better. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I see the Prime Minister's already on his pre-prepared lines. This is a serious question of national security. The Prime Minister sat on this report for 10 months and failed to plug a gap in our law on national security for a year and a half. Mr. Speaker, one of the starkest conclusions in the report is that the UK is clearly a target for Russian disinformation campaigns. The report also highlights that this is being met with a fragmented response across Whitehall and across the government. The report refers to this as a hot potato, with no one organisation recognising itself as having the overall lead. That's a serious gap in our defences. This is not about powers, it's about responsibility, Prime Minister. So how is the Prime Minister going to address that gap and make sure the UK meets this threat with the joined-up, robust response it deserves?
Mr. Speaker, there is no other government in the world that takes more robust steps to protect our democracy, to protect our critical national infrastructure, and to protect our intellectual property, as I have said, from interference by Russia or by anyone else. And frankly, I think that everybody understands that these criticisms are motivated by a desire to undermine the referendum on the European Union, the membership of the European Union that took place in 2016, the result of which he simply cannot bring himself to accept.
A serious gap in our Official Secrets Act, laying bare for 18 months, and that's all the Prime Minister has to say about it. One way the government can seek to clamp down on Russian influence is to prevent the spread of Kremlin-backed disinformation. Obviously, social media companies have a big role to play, but the report also highlights serious distortions in the coverage provided by Russian state-owned international broadcasters such as Russia Today. The High Court has ruled that Russia Today broadcasts pose actual and potential harm. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it's time to look again at the licensing for Russia Today to operate in the UK?
Mr. Speaker, I think this would come more credibly from the Leader of the Opposition had he called out the former Leader of the Opposition when he took money for appearing on Russia Today. I mean, Mr. Speaker, he protested neither against the former Leader of the Opposition's stance on Salisbury, nor against his willingness to take money from Russia Today. He flip-flops from day to day, Mr. Speaker. One day he's in favour of staying in the EU. The next day he's willing to accept Brexit. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has more flip-flops than Bournemouth Beach.
Flip-flops, Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the party opposite bravely abstained on a vote that attempted to tie us into the EU indefinitely, further highlighting the increasing detachment of Labour from the old heartlands like Rother Valley. Can my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, confirm that we on this side of the House remain fully committed to delivering our promises to the British people and to restoring our full economic independence on the 1st of January, so the people of Thurcroft, Maltby, Diddington and across Rother Valley get the Brexit bonanza and level up that we so deserve?
Mr. Speaker, I certainly can give my honourable friend that assurance. That's what the people voted for, and that's what we will deliver.
Bring Keir Starmer back for one more question. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, pre-prepared gags on flip-flops. This is the former columnist who wrote 2 versions of every article ever published. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, in case the Prime Minister hasn't noticed, the Labour Party is under new management. And no front bencher of this party has appeared on Russia Today since I've been leading this party. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister about the appalling persecution of the Uyghur Muslims in China. We've all seen the footage of the Uyghurs being herded onto trains and heard the heartbreaking stories of forced sterilisation, murder and imprisonment. We support the Foreign Secretary, the Prime Minister and the government in their strong and clear condemnation of China for this in recent weeks. What further steps will the Prime Minister take? And in particular, will he consider targeted sanctions against those responsible? And will he lead a concerted diplomatic action with our international partners to make clear that this simply cannot be allowed to stand in the 21st century?
Mr. Speaker, that's why the Foreign Secretary only this week condemned the treatment of the Uyghurs, and that's why this government, for the first time, has brought in targeted sanctions against those who abuse human rights in the form of the Magnitsky Act. And I'm delighted he now supports the government. But last week, of course, he didn't support the government, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad he's with us this week. I don't know how many more questions he's got, Mr. Speaker, since you allow him to come back and ask throughout this session. We've been getting on consistently with delivering on our agenda. A year ago, Mr. Speaker, this was a leader of the opposition who was supporting an anti-Semitism condoning Labour, a government that wanted to repeal Brexit. I represent a government that was getting on with delivering on the people's priorities. 40 new hospitals, Mr. Speaker, 20,000 more police, 50,000 more nurses, and by the way, we've already recruited 12,000 more nurses and 6,000 more doctors and 4,000 more police. We are delivering on the people's priorities. We are the people's government, and by the way, we're the government that supports the workers of this country as well, with the biggest ever increase in the living wage.
We will make America great again.